Today's Daf Nun, and we're starting at the Mishnah on Memtet Amud Bet at the bottom. So it says Ketzad Bezamnin. This is very appropriate since we're having breakfast. How do you do Zimun? Bishlosha. If you have three people, Omer Nevarech, we say Nevarech Shachal Mishalo. Nevarech means let us say the Berakhah. Bishlosha, if it's four people, Omer Barechu. So this is not what we do. But it says here in the Mishnah that if you have four people eating, so then the person who's the mizamen, the person who's leading the Birkat HaMazon says, Barechu. He speaks to the other three and says, you should bless. Rather than saying Nivarech Ba'asara, when you have 10, Omer Nivarech Elohenu. You say, let us bless our God. You add the name of Hashem in Birkat HaMazon. Ba'asara v'hu. If it's 11, Omer Barechu, then the person who's leading the Birkat HaMazon says Barechu. He speaks to the 10. Since there are 11, he can speak to the 10 and say Barechu Elohenu. You should bless our God. And then it says, Echad asara v'echad asara ribo. It doesn't matter if it's 10 people or if it's 100,000 people. It's the same Birkat HaMazon. We don't add anything else to Birkat HaMazon. Once you have over 10 people, it's all the same. However, now we go on to another. Now, at first it seems like a contradiction, but the Gemara is going to take this up later. B'me'ah omer, if you have 100 people, the Mizamen says, Nevarech Hashem Elohenu. He adds the name Hashem. B'me'avahu, if it's 101, Omer Barechu. Then he says, Barechu Hashem Elohenu. You should bless Hashem our God. Ba'elef, if there are 1,000 people who Omer Nevarech Hashem Elohenu, Elohei Yisrael. So he adds another name of Hashem. He says, let us bless Hashem our God, the God of Israel. Ba'elef vahu, if it's 1,001 people, Omer Barechu. Then he says, you should bless Hashem our God, the God of Israel. Beribo, if he has 10,000, Omer Nevarech Hashem, Elohenu, Elohei Israel, Elohei Tzevaot, Yosheva Kiruvim, Ala Mazon She'achalnu. So then he has a very long zimun. He says, let us bless Hashem, our God, the God of Israel, the God of hosts, who sits atop the Kiruvim for the food that we have eaten. Beribovahu, if it's 10,001 people, Omer Barechu, then he says Barechu. Instead of saying Nevarech, let us bless, he says Barechu, you should bless. Because the group doesn't have to include him. And just as he opens the Birkat HaMazon, the Zimun, they answer him. Baruch Hashem, Elohenu, Elohei Yisrael, Elohei Tzevaot, Yosheva Kiruvim Ala Mazon She'achalnu. That's of course talking about the last example. So in each case, the people who are responding to the Mizamen say their answer in accordance with what he says. So if he says Nevarech She'achalnu Mishalo, they say Baruch She'achalnu Mishalo. If he says Nevarech Elohenu She'achalnu Mishalo, they say Baruch Elohenu She'achalnu Mishalo. So depending on what the Mizamen says, the answerers answer. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Lefi rova kahal hem mivarachim. According to the size of the group, so is the blessing determined. And that's exactly what it's saying here. In other words, we've said that if it's 10, if it's 100, if it's 1,000, if it's 10,000, it changes. Where do we get this from? Shneimar b'makelot baruchu Elohim Hashem mimakor Yisrael, because it says in groups b'makelot you should bless God Hashem mimakor Yisrael, from the source of Israel. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. He says Ma matzino b'beit hakneset. Wait a second. What do we find in the synagogue? Echad mirubim ve'echad mu'atim. Whether it's a lot of people or it's a few people, Omer baruchu et Hashem. It doesn't matter if it's many people, if it's 10,000 people, or if it's 10 people. Does the minyan, the way a minyan prays, does it depend if it's 1,000 people or 10 people? It's the same thing. So too, you say Baruch Hu et Hashem. Rabbi Ishmael Omer Baruch Hu et Hashem HaMevorach. Rabbi Ishmael says you don't say Baruch Hu et Hashem, you say Baruch Hu et Hashem HaMevorach, which we know, right? That's how we do it. Now the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Le'olam al yotzei adam et atzmo min hakelal. A person should not exclude himself, says Shmuel, from the group. Tenan, we said in the Mishnah, Omer Baruchu, that when in the Mishnah it tells us when there are four people, instead of saying Nevarech is including yourself. Let us bless. Baruchu is not including yourself. It's saying you guys should bless. So he says, what about the Mishnah? The Mishnah contradicts Shmuel, because Shmuel says you shouldn't exclude yourself. The Mishnah says when there are four people, you do exclude yourself. Ema af Baruchu. What it means is you can even say Baruchu, since there are three people besides you. Umikol makom nevarech adif. However, saying nevarech, let us say Birkat HaMazon, is superior to that. The Amar Rav Hada bar Ava. Because Rav Ada bar Rava says, Amar Berav, they said in the Yeshiva of Rav Tanena, we already learned, Vav nechalakin ad Yud, that 6 people can separate into 2 groups of 3 and say Birkat HaMazon. Why? Because if you're 6, what do you say? Nivarech she'achalnu shelo. If you're 3, what do you say? Nivarech she'achalnu, it doesn't matter. So it's the same. So Amrat Bishlama Nivarech Adif Mishum Hachi Nechalakin. So if you're going to say that saying Nivarech is better, let us say that Birkat HaMazon is better, then it makes sense that you're going to separate. If you have 6, you separate into 2 groups of 3. Ella Amrat Berakhot Daf. But if you're going to say that Baruchu is better, that saying you all bless is better, then Amay Nechlakin, why would you separate when you have 6? You shouldn't separate. Because you want one person to be able to say to the group, Baruchu. And if you have 2 groups of 3, they can only say, Nivarech. So what do you see from that? That actually Nivarech is better. So, therefore, Elalav Shemamina, Nivarech Adif Shemamina. So therefore we can conclude that Nivarech is better. Because if it were not better, then they would say, no, keep the group together of 6. So you can say, Baruchu, She'achalnu Mishalom. And you don't have to say, Nivarech She'achalnu Mishalom. So what do you see? Nivarech is better because they're saying split into 2 groups and say Nivarech, rather than preferring Baruchu. Tani Nam Yachid also says in Abaraita, Ben Shamar Baruchu, Ben Shamar Nivarech, En Tofsin Oto Al Kach, that whether he says Baruchu or Nivarech, it doesn't really matter. En Tofsin Oto means we don't criticize him. V'nakdanin Tofsin Oto Al Kach. But those who are particular do criticize somebody who says Baruchu because he's excluding himself. And from the way a person says his berachot, we can determine if a person is a Talmid Chacham or not. And as we said, back then, they used to improvise in berachot. They didn't have as much of a fixed text. So different chazanim, or different leaders, different shlichei tzibur, they would say a little bit differently. So he says, for example, Ketzad, Rabbi says, Uv tuvo, harei Talmid Chacham. If a person says Uv tuvo chayinu, when we answer Birkat HaMazon, we say Baruch she'achalnu shelo, Uv tuvo chayinu, and through his goodness chayinu, we live. If he says Uv tuvo Talmid Chacham, that's right. Umi tuvo harei zebur. But if he says Umi tuvo chayinu, from his goodness we live, that guy's a fool. Why is he a fool? Because you're insulting Hashem. Because you're saying, he didn't really give us enough. Mituvo, he gave us a little bit from what he has, but he didn't give us a lot. Because mituvo, if a person gives you a scrap of bread, you eat a crumb, it's also mituvo. So when you say, uv tuvo chayinu, and the fullness of his goodness is what he gives us, then you're doing justice to Hashem. Amar le Abaye Rav Dimi. Abaye said to Rav Dimi, v'akitiv, umi birchatecha yivarech et bet avdecha le'olam. It says in the pasuk, this is found in Shmuel Bet. He says, that from your blessing, the house of your servant will be blessed forever. Okay, so what does that mean? From your blessing, Yivorach. From your blessing, the house of your servant will be blessed forever. So what does that show you? Saying mituvo is okay, because mi birchatecha. Okay, so what is the answer? B'shela shaneh. When it comes to asking for something, it's different. Why? Because you don't want to seem like greedy. So you say to Hashem, Umi birchatecha yivorach. I only want a little bit. Don't give me everything. But when you're thanking Hashem, you don't want to thank somebody in a grudging way. So, like you come to somebody's house and say, thanks for sharing a little bit of your food with me. Oh, really? I only shared a little bit? Well, that's not nice. You're insulting me. But if you ask, you don't say to somebody, give me all of your food. You say, give me a little bit. So when you speak to Hashem and you ask Him, you say, Omi birchatecha yivorach, give me a little bit. When you thank Him, you say, Bit uv tuvo chayinu, you gave us a lot. So, but wait a second. B'shela nami yaketiv archev picha v'amaleu. But doesn't Hashem say, open your mouth wide, I'm going to fill it? Meaning, ask me for everything. Don't hold back. Ask me for everything. Answer, Hahu b'divrei Torah ketiv, that's talking about in spiritual matters. When it comes to spiritual matters, you ask Hashem for everything. You ask Him for divrei Torah, for everything. But when it comes to the material things, you don't act like you're greedy. You act in a way that's more modest. Tanya, it says in the Braita, Rabbi Omer, b'tuvo chayinu, harizeh Talmid Chacham. If you said chayinu, we live by your goodness, Hashem, you're Talmid Chacham. If you said chayim, uvtuvo chayim, they live by your goodness, You didn't say Chayinu, we live. You said Chayim, they live. Harei Zebur, that is a classless way to speak because you're excluding yourself. Everybody else lives by the goodness of Hashem. What do you live by? You know, what's your alternative? Nahar Belai matne ipcha. The Nahar Belai taught the opposite. They actually said, no, it's better to say Uv Tuvo Chayim. Why? Because actually it's better to include the whole world. If you say Chayinu, it's limited. You're saying just us. If you say Chayim, you're including everybody in the world. However, Velet Hilchita Nahar Belai, we don't follow the Nahar Belai. We say Uv Tuvo Chayinu, we live by the goodness of Hashem. Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, Nevarech She'achalnu Mishalo. If you say blessed, let us bless the one from whom we have eaten, Harei Ze Talmid Chacham, that is the way of a Talmid Chacham. Lemi She'achalnu Mishalo, saying Lemi She'achalnu Mishalo, Harei Ze Bur. That is a foolish way of speaking. Why? Because Lemi She'achalnu Mishalo means we're thanking the one from whom we have eaten. When you say Nevarech She'achalnu Mishalo, you don't have the word Lemi. Lemi implies that there are different alternatives. Like, oh, you can thank, your grandmother for making you something. I'm thanking Hashem. Lemi She'achalnu Mishalo. We thank the one that provided for us. You thank the one that provided for you. It sounds like there are different alternatives. But when you say Baruch She'achalnu Mishalo or Nevarech She'achalnu Mishalo, it doesn't say Lemi She'achalnu Mishalo. It doesn't imply that there are other alternatives. Amar le Rav Achabre de Rava Ravashi. Rav Achabre de Rava said Ravashi. V'hamrina. But we said Lemi. We say, give thanks to the one, and we say this actually in the Haggadah of Pesach. We give thanks lemi to the one who did with us and for our forefathers all these miracles. Right? That's in the Haggadah. Amar le atam muchacham milta man avid nisei kutsha berichu. There, it's not a problem, because if I say nivarech lemi she'achalnu mishalo, I'm going to bless the one of the many alternatives who provided for me. That implies that there are other alternatives. But when I say to Hashem, we know who does miracles. Your grandmother doesn't do miracles, okay? Nobody else does miracles. So if I say lemi she'asalanu et kol hanisim, I know that I'm talking about Hashem because I'm talking about miracles. But when you're talking about food, you might think that the one who provides you with food is, I don't know, the government, for example, or perhaps or whoever it is. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Baruch she'achalnu mishalo, harei ze talmid chacham, ala mazon she'achalnu harei ze bur. If you say, blessed is the one from whom we have eaten, she'achalnu mishalo, that we have eaten from his provision, this is a talmid chacham, ala mazon she'achalnu. If you say, Baruch ala mazon she'achalnu, you say, blessed we bless for the food that we've eaten, harei ze bur, because it doesn't identify the source from which the food came. It just says, Baruch ala mazon she'achalnu. Baruch ala mazon she'achalnu could be Baruch, you're blessing the Balabayit. It could be that you're blessing anybody. You could be blessing Barack Obama for giving you welfare or food stamps, okay? Rav Huna, Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said, Lo amaran ele begimel. Telek Hashem shamayim. That's only true when you have three of a zimun and you say Baruch. If you said Baruch ala mazon she'achalnu, so it doesn't identify who you're blessing. Nivarech ala mazon she'achalnu, it doesn't identify who are you blessing. Who? Aval ba'asara, but when you have 10, the ikashem shamayim uchacham miltak, there it's clear when you have 10 who you're blessing, because you add the word Eloheinu. You said Nivarech Eloheinu she'achalnu mishalom. So we know. So even if you said Nivarech Eloheinu ala mazon she'achalnu, it's still clear who you're blessing in that case. It says in the Mishnah, as it says in the Mishnah itself, that in the very, very long version of the Zimun for 10,000 people, it says, Baruch Hashem, Elohei Yisrael, Elohei HaTzivaot, blessed is Hashem, God of Israel, God of the hosts, Yoshev HaKeruvim, who sits atop the Keruvim, Ala Mazon She'achalnu, for the food that we ate. So there it's okay. Achad Asara, Achad Asara Ribo. It said, whether it's 10 or it's 10,000, or it's 100,000 rather. So Hagufa Kasha, there's a contradiction in the Mishnah. Amarta, you said first, Echad Asara Asara Ribo. First you said it doesn't matter if there are 10 or there's 10,000. Alma ki hadadeninu. That implies what? It's the same, whether you have 10 or 10,000. But then you go on, V'hadar kataneh, b'me'a omer, b'elef omer, b'ribo omer. Then you went on to say, if you have 100, the zimun is X. If you have 1,000, the zimun is different. If you have 10,000, the zimun is something else. But how can you tell me? First you said it doesn't matter. Anything over 10, it's the same. And then you said, no, 100 is different, 1,000 is different, 10,000 is different. So Amar Rav Yosef said, Lo kasha, no problem. Ha Rav Yosef Glili, ha Rabbi Akiva. One is Rabbi Yosef Glili's opinion. One is Rabbi Akiva. Titznan, as it said in the end of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer, Lefi Rov HaKahal Mivarechim, Shene'emar b'makelot baruchu Elohim. Because at the end of the Mishnah, it goes back on the subject and says, Rabbi Yosef Glili said that you change depending on the number. And Rabbi Akiva said, it doesn't matter. Whether you have 10 or more than 10 in the Bet Knesset, it doesn't change the prayers. So in Birkat Hamazon, it doesn't change the zimun. Am Rabbi Akiva Maltzino b'Beit Knesset. So Rabbi Akiva's argument was from the Bet Knesset, from what we do in synagogue. Just like in Bet Knesset, it doesn't matter if you have a minyan, or you have 1,000 people, or you have 100,000, you have 1,000,000. It's always the same. So too, when it comes to Birkat Hamazon. So Rabbi Akiva, Hi Kirat Rabbi Yosef Gilili, Mayavidle. What is he going to do with the pasuk of Rabbi Yosef Gilili? Rabbi Yosef Gilili brings from B'makelot, that it says B'makelot, it says in groups, we bless Hashem. So it would seem that it depends how many people you have, what the barakah is going to be. So he says, Rabbi Akiva interprets this pasuk not as telling us that depending on the number of people, the barakah is going to change, but that depending on the number of people, for a different midrash altogether. Rabbi Meir used to say, how do we know that even the fetus, this is a very pro-life braita here, even the fetus that was in its mother's womb was saying shira, was saying praise to Hashem at Yam Suf, when the sea was splitting. How do we know this? Shene'emar b'makelot baruchu Elohim Hashem mimikor Yisrael, that in groups in the congregation bless Hashem from the source of Israel. So you see that b'makelot is coming to include everybody, even those who are invisible, even those who are unseen. So that's what he learns from that pasuk. Ve'idach. And what about Rabbi Yosef Gilili? How can he use that pasuk for two things? He uses that pasuk. He agrees that even the unborn souls were praising Hashem at Yam Suf, but he also thinks that it teaches you something about the zimun. So what does he do? Ve'idach mimekor nafka. He learns the idea of the unborn fetuses. That's from the word mimekor, from the source of Israel, because the makor means from the womb. But b'makelot in groups means that depending on the size of the group, there's going to be a variation in the nature of the Birkat Hamazon. Amar Rava says, Halacha ki Rabbi Akiva. We know this already. It doesn't matter if you're at a wedding and you have 100 people, hundreds of people. You always say the same Birkat Hamazon. Ravina Rav Chama Bar Buzi iklu lebeiresh galuta. Once Rav Chama Bar Buzi and Ravina were at the house of the exilarch, of the head of the exile. Kam Rav Chama v'kam mehader rabbe me'ah. He was looking for 100 people for Birkat Hamazon to get together so he could say the special zimun for 100 people. Amar le Ravina said, Lo tzarichat hachi, you don't need this. Amar Rava halacha ki Rabbi Akiva, because we said already, Rava said the halacha is ki Rabbi Akiva, it follows Rabbi Akiva, and therefore it doesn't make a difference, 10 or 100 or 1,000, same Birkat Hamazon. Amar Rava said, Ki achlinan rifta beresh galuta, mivarechinan gimel gimel. He said that we bless in groups of 3. Even though there were, let's say, hundreds of people at the house of the Rish Galut, still they would separate into groups of 3 so they could leave, because the meal went on too long. They didn't want to wait for him to say it was time to say Birkat Hamazon, so they split into groups. Vili Baruchu Yud Yud. But wait, if there were hundreds of people, why didn't they split into groups of 10? Why did they split into groups of 3? They're going to lose saying Hashem's name in the Zimun. Answer, Shema Rish Galuta Vikpad, because if you have groups of 10, it's too big. You're making a scene already. And then the Rish Galuta is going to say, hey, why are you not waiting for my Birkat Hamazon? What kind of kavod is this? He's going to be upset, so they made it smaller, groups of 3. V'nifku b'Birkata, the Rish Galuta. Why didn't they just wait for the Rish Galuta to say Birkat Hamazon? It wasn't because they were in a rush. It was Aidi da'avishu kule alma lo sham'i. Because since everybody was so loud and talking, even during Birkat Hamazon, apparently the people were not quiet, they were still talking, so they couldn't hear. And because they couldn't hear, they had to say their own Birkat Hamazon. Amar Rabba said, Rabba Tosfa'a said, Hanei Gimel de Karche Rifta Badei Adadei V'kadem Chad Minayu Uvarech the date, if you had 3 people had a meal together, and one of them went ahead and said Birkat Hamazon on his own, this happens all the time, right? Yeah. You have 3 people, and one guy goes and Birkat Hamazon. Now you don't have 3 anymore. So what do you do? Inun nafkin bezimun didei, iulo nafik bezimun didu. This is an important halakha to know. If you have 3 people and one of them goes ahead and says Birkat Hamazon without everybody else, as long as it's only one of the 3, you can still do a zimun. But he doesn't actually fulfill the mitzvah anymore. He missed it, but he can give you the mitzvah. You can still get the mitzvah. But even though you can use him, in other words, he's still there. Let's say you said we had bread, and Yonatan accidentally said Birkat Hamazon. He forgot we were going to do a zimun. Now Sammy and I, we can say Birkat Hamazon. We can do a zimun with you, even though you said Birkat Hamazon. But technically, you don't get credit for the mitzvah because you lost it already. But you can help us do the mitzvah because you're still here.
Without saying mitzvah?
Yeah, if you ate with us, yeah. So Rabbi Yishmael says, and this is talking about Baruchu versus, do we say Baruchu et Hashem HaMevorach, or do we say Baruchu et Hashem? Rabbi Akiva said just say Baruchu et Hashem. Lefi Rabbi Yishmael, you say Baruchu et Hashem HaMevorach. Rav Ram bar Papa ikla lebet knesset de Avi Gibar. Rav Ram bar Papa came to the Bet Knesset of Avi Gibar. Kam kara b'sifra, he got up and he read in the Sefer Torah. V'amar Baruchu et Hashem. He didn't say Baruchu et Hashem HaMevorach. Ve'ishtik v'lo amar HaMevorach. He didn't say the word HaMevorach. He was following Rabbi Akiva. Why did he think to follow Rabbi Akiva? It makes sense, because in the Mishnah we said that when it comes to Birkat Hamazon, when it comes to the language of Zimun, we follow Rabbi Akiva. So he said, also with regard to this, we must follow Rabbi Akiva. So, Avishu Kule Alma, everybody started screaming at him. Apparently synagogues have not changed. And everybody screamed at him. Baruch Hashem HaMevorach. Say Baruch Hashem HaMevorach. So because Amar Rava said, Patya Ukama. Black pot. That was a nickname that they had. It meant a very experienced person, because the pot gets black when you use it a lot. So a very experienced guy. Bahadei plukta lamalach. Why are you getting involved in a machloket between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva? Ve'od hanahug alma ki Rabbi Yishmael. And moreover, everybody has accepted the custom of to follow Rabbi Yishmael, that we say Baruch et Hashem HaMevorach. But it's comforting to know that even back then, if you made a mistake, not just one person, but everybody would scream at you. It's not a minhag chadash.
Why do you don't say
Baruch, because he's talking to everybody, and then everyone else says Baruch Hashem HaMevorach.
You say eight, it's like there is more than.
Oh, why you say et Hashem?
Yeah.
Well, grammatically that's correct, because it's the direct object. You always put et. Technically it's correct, grammatically. So the Mishnah says, Gimel she'achilu ke'achat. So shlosha she'achilu ke'achat. You have 3 people that ate together. Einanu she'ein lechalek. They can't split up. In other words, once they are chayav b'zimun, they have to do zimun. V'chein daled v'chein chamisha, same with 4 and 5. Vav nechalakin ad asara. If you have 6, they can separate, because they're still going to be doing the same. As long as you maintain a zimun, you can separate. V'asara nechalakin ad esrim. If you have 10, they can't split unless you have 20. Then they can split in 2. If you have shte chavurot sheyu ochlot v'bayit echad, בזמן שמקצתנו אלו את אלו, הרי אלו מצטרפים לזימון. If you have 2 groups that are eating, as long as they can see each other, they can connect for a zimun. So let's say you had 5 people at one table and 5 people at the other table. So they could hypothetically make 2 different zimunim. They wouldn't be together. But since they see each other, they can say Birkat Hamazon. They can do Nivarech Eloheinu Shechal Himself, because they're 10. And then he says, right, Ve'im lav, elo mezamenin latzman, ve'elo mezamenin latzman. If they don't see each other, they have to make their zimun separately. En mevarachin ala yayin, ad sheiten letoch hamayim. The Chachamim say, you can't say Borei Pri Gefen. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer says, you can't say Borei Pri Gefen unless you mix water into the wine. Chachamim omrim mevarachin. According to the rabbis, you can. What's the point? Because in those days, the wine that they had was very strong. It was like concentrate. It was like concentrate. So if you think of orange concentrate that they make, this is not fruit, this is not orange juice from concentrate, but the concentrate that they make, like the other orange juice that's not as good. They take the concentrate and they mix it with water. So that's what they used to do. They had very, very strong wine. It was almost like a jelly type of wine. It was very thick and very strong. It wasn't really edible. You wouldn't drink it. And they would mix it with water, and that would make wine. So, according to the Chachamim, even if you were to drink the concentrate, you would say, Borei Priya Gefen. According to Rabbi Eliezer, since it's not complete wine yet, it's not really ready for drinking, therefore you say, Borei Priya Etz, as we're going to see. The Gemara says, Maika Mashmalan, why does the beginning of the Mishnah say, Shilosh She'achlu Ke'achat Einan Rishayin L'chalek? We know this already. We know that when you have three people, we learned at the very beginning of the Perek, that Shilosh She'achlu Ke'achat Chayavim Mizamen. We already know they have to do zimun. So what's the chidush? What's the new idea here? Ke'ad Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel. It's like Rabbi Abba said, that Shmuel said, Gimel Sheyashvu Le'echol Ke'achat, V'adayin Achilu, Einan Rishayin L'chalek. What's the chidush? The chidush is that even from the beginning of the meal, if they sat down to eat together, even if they didn't eat yet, or as the Shulchan Aruch says, even if they didn't eat a kazayit yet, in other words, they just had a little taste, still, as soon as they begin a meal together, they're obligated in zimun. You might say, if they just had a taste, a crumb, they could still walk away and not have to have a zimun. But the answer is, once they sit down and they start eating together, they have to have zimun. Lishana harina, another possibility is, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel, Achi Katane. This is what it means. Shlosha sheyashvu le'echol ke'achat, af al pi shekol echad bi'echad ochel mikikaro, enan rishayin l'chalek. That if you have three people, even if each person has his own role. You have your own role, I have my own role. We're just sitting at the same. I have my own bagel, you have your own bagel. We're not eating from the same lechem. What's the chidush? You might have thought, when do we have an obligation of zimun? When we have one big challah, and we share it, and we do hamotzi together, and I give each person bread, then we have a zimun. But if I'm eating my own sandwich over here, you're eating yours over there, you're eating a different sandwich, what's the connection? Just that we're sitting at the same table. And yet what it means is, nonetheless, you have to say a zimun. So even if three people sit down and they bring their lunch from home, and each one is eating a lunch at the cafeteria, and we just because we sat together at the same table and we started eating, even each person from his own sandwich, chayavim lezamen, and now you can't walk away from the table. You have to do a zimun. That's the chidush that he's telling us. Okay. Inami ki had Ravuna. Alternatively, what Ravuna said, Amar Ravuna. That if you have three people who came from three different groups, they are not allowed to separate. Okay, so what this is talking about, according to Rashi, what it means is, you had three people who had eaten in different groups, and they separated from their groups, and then they sat together with these two other people from another group. Now that they sat together, since each one is obligated in zimun from his other group, now they sit together, they have to do a zimun together. Because even though your zimun is usually a function of your group, here, because they had an obligation of zimun, and their group didn't do Birkat HaMazon yet, they still have the chiyuv of zimun, they do a zimun together with two other people from two other groups. Okay? And that's why he says, Amar Rav Chizda, that's only if they had a chiyuv of zimun in their respective groups, and then they left the group, they wandered away, and somehow they missed the opportunity to do Birkat HaMazon, and now they find themselves with two other people from two other groups that also had an obligation of zimun, and just happened to have walked away from their groups as well. Now they can make a zimun together, and it's no problem. Amar Rava says, as we turn to Amud Bet, this is only if those with whom they were with whom they ate didn't do a zimun already. But once the group that they were with has already done Birkat HaMazon, so now they can no longer go back. So what does it mean? It means, like, for example, let's say you're sitting with three people, or like Rashi says, the easiest example is there were four people. And you walked away from the table, and there's two groups of four. There are three groups of four people. There are 12 people. 4 people over there, 4 people there, 4 people there. You walked away from your group. Somebody walked away from group number 2. Somebody walked away from group number 3. And each of those groups said Birkat HaMazon with the 3 that were left, and you were excluded. So now your obligation of zimun is gone. So if they hadn't done Birkat HaMazon yet, So you could do Birkat HaMazon with two other people from the two other groups. But once your respective groups do Birkat HaMazon, that's it. They took your obligation of Birkat HaMazon away. Because your obligation of Birkat HaMazon came from being a member of that original group. And if that original group discharged their obligation of Birkat HaMazon, you lose it. You see? So, Amar Rava says, Mana Minala. He brings a rather unusual source to support this halakha, which is from the laws of Tumah v'Tahorah. There's a rule that if an object is tameh, if it's broken or split in half, it loses its status of Tumah, and even if you reassemble it, it doesn't regain it. It's not, as we learned in the Mishnah, mitash nigneva chetzia, a bed that half of it was stolen. Who steals half a bed? I don't know. O she'avda chetzia, or you lost half of it. How'd you lose half of it? I don't know that either. I guess it got ruined, or you had to cut it off for some reason. Or brothers split it in an inheritance, or partners split it as they were separating their business. Teorah. It becomes teorah because any item that became tameh, when it's broken, it loses the tum'ah. Hechezirua. If they reassembled it, mekabele tum'ah mikanu laba. Okay, from now and to the future it can become tameh. However, mikanu laba'in lemafreya lo. But whatever tum'ah it had before is gone. Alma kevan de pelagua parachla tum'ah mina. Which means once you split it, it loses its tum'ah and it doesn't come back when you reassemble it. Hachanami, so to here, kevan dazmun alayu parach zimun minayu. Once the original group is broken, because the original group did a zimun. So now these individuals, you might say, yeah, but they reconstituted a new group, right? Because there were 4 in each of the original groups. They left the original groups, they made a new group. So what that their previous group did a zimun already and they broke away? Why do we care about that? The answer is, we care because since you only had an obligation of zimun as a member of that group, you can't reconstitute the group by finding 2 other people who also didn't do a zimun. Because each of you only had that status of needing a zimun because of your group. Once your group's obligation is gone, it doesn't magically reappear when you assemble a new group with 2 other people.
And that case only works if they've completed eating.
Right.
And then but if, let's say they're in the middle of eating, they still have half a piece of bread, and then the other 2 people also have half a piece of bread.
Right.
That's a different case.
That could be a different case. Now, for example, but the same would apply if you have 3 groups of 3, and let's say you're not done. You were 2 other people. You're not done eating yet, and the other 2 people are. So you listen to the zimun, you answer the zimun, and then you go back to eating. You can't now do a zimun with somebody else because even though you have to still say Birkat HaMazon when you're done, you already did the obligation of zimun. All right? Yeah, but so as long as those other groups are still active and they haven't done Birkat HaMazon yet, you can constitute a new group and do Birkat HaMazon. But once they finish Birkat HaMazon, now your identity as a person who can do zimun is gone. Even though you still have to do Birkat HaMazon, and even if you sit with these new people, unless you have a new meal with them, you're not going to be able to do a zimun anymore. So now we said that if you had 2 chavarot that can't see each other, then they are considered separate groups. However, Tana, it says in the Baraita, Im yesh shamash benehem, shamash mitzarafan. If they have one waiter serving both of them, then even if they can't see each other, as long as they can hear the Birkat HaMazon across the 2 rooms, they can combine. Why is that important? Why is it important? It's important because let's say you have only 6 people in one room and 4 people in the other, and you want to be able to say a full Birkat HaMazon, or you want to do Sheva Berachot, and you're in 2 different rooms, and you realize you ate in 2 different rooms, but you had one waiter, and it was intended to be one meal. Having one waiter means it was one meal. You just were located in 2 different rooms. You can do Birkat HaMazon as one group as long as you can hear each other. Now we get to this issue of the wine. So, and mivarachin al yayin, that we don't say the blessing on wine unless you added water to it in the old days, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, yayin ad shelo natan letocho mayim and mivarachin alav borei pri hagefen, until you mix water into the concentrate. Because again, in those days, what did they have? They had concentrate. They mixed it with water. They didn't drink the concentrate. So when you took out a bottle of wine, you didn't take out a fancy bottle of wine from Kosher Mart or from the Montgomery County liquor store. You took out a bottle of this concentrate. You put some of this gel stuff in a cup and you mixed it with water, and that was what you made wine. So what happens if you say, no, I want the hard stuff. I'm going to drink the. It's no good according to Rabbi Eliezer. It's not even borei pri hagefen. So that's what he says. Okay. Ela borei pri ha'etz. It's still borei pri ha'etz. V'notilin mimenu liyadayim. You can use it for netilat yadayim. It's considered fruit juice. It's not even considered wine. You put water in there, then it becomes wine, and the two new halachot emerge. Number one, you have borei pri hagefen, and number two, you can't use it for netilat yadayim because you're not allowed to ruin wine. You're not allowed to use, you have to have kavod for the wine. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Chachamim say, ben kach uven kach, mivarchin alav borei pri hagefen. Either way, borei pri hagefen. Even if you drink wine concentrate, so to speak. And you don't use it for netilat yadayim. So, keman azla had amar Shemuel ose adam kol tzrachav b'pat. Who is the one who says you can use bread to do things? Let's say, for example, you want to carry something or hand something to somebody. You can use bread as a conveyor. You put the object on the bread and you reach the bread and the person takes it off the bread. You can use the bread for things. Keman ki Rabbi Eliezer. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says you can use food for non-food purposes, such as washing your hands, such as other things that you might want to use it for. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Modim Chachamim Rabbi Eliezer. Even the Chachamim are going to agree that we don't use wine concentrate for berachot. If you need to say a beracha, like a kiddush or birkat hamazon ala kos, you want to do birkat hamazon on a cup of wine, you must mix water. My ta'ama, what's the reason? Amar Rav Oshaya says, Ba'inan mitzvah min ha-mubchar, because you require the best. When it comes to regular drinking and you happen to be crazy and you want to drink wine concentrate, that's your own business. But you want to do kiddush, you want to do havdalah, birkat hamazon, it has to be the finest, it has to be in the best state. Why did the rabbis say that you say borei pri hagefen on this wine concentrate? I mean, what is it? It's not wine. Amar Rabbi Zera, chazeh koryati. Koryati is some kind of a mixture that they used to make, or I think it's koraiti actually. Koraiti is some kind of mixture that they would make of this thick wine concentrate with oil and other things, and it was a medicinal thing. So because the koraiti is one situation where you would actually consume this, it's considered edible, and it's considered something that you can say borei pri hagefen on it. They said 4 things about bread. What are they? You don't put raw meat on bread. Why? Because you ruin the bread. You put raw meat on a bread, it's going to soak in the juice of the raw meat, and it's going to be disgusting. If you're passing a full cup of liquid, you don't pass it over the bread. What's the reason? You're going to spill on it. Right? This is the halacha that many Sfaradim, they have a minhag that lizrok et lechem. But it's really against the halacha. What?
I thought it was the opposite. My wife would never say that.
She's right. Really, you're not supposed to throw it, but many people, they would throw it. Many Sfaradim do it, but it's really against that.
The reason that people do it is because you're not supposed to hand the bread.
That's true. That's true.
You just put it in front of them, but you don't throw it.
Right. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to put like bread.
Best part.
You're not supposed to put bread in somebody's hand because it's like they're an ani. Right. It's like it's a poor person. You don't throw it. Don't use bread to hold up your plate. You need someone to put on your plate. Don't put it on the challah. That's not a good place to put your plate. So, Amemar Umar Zutrav Ravashi. So Amemar Umar Zutrav Ravashi Karchu Rifta Badeh the day once they were having a meal together. Aitil Kamayu Tamre v'Rimoneh. They brought before them dates and rimonim, pomegranates. Shakal Mar Zutra Petak Lekame Ravashi Distina. It says that Mar Zutra took a piece of meat and he threw it in front of Rav Ashi. He took a piece of meat and he threw it in front of him. Amar le lo savar lamar lahaditanya en zorkinat ochalin. How can you throw? He threw chatichat basan. He threw a piece of meat. So he said, Hahi bapat tanya. That's only bread. You're not allowed to throw bread because it's the staple food. It's the fundamental food, so you have to have respect for it. But other food, meat, you can throw. Ve'atanya, but it says in another baraita, Keshem shen zorakin etapat, kach en zorakin et ochalin. It says in the baraita you're not supposed to throw any food. Marley responded to him, Ve'atanya, afal pi shen zorakin etapat, aval zorakin et ochalin. In another baraita it says, even though you don't throw, you are not allowed to throw bread, you are allowed to throw other foods. So which is correct? Ela lo kasha, ha b'midei de mim'is, ha b'midei de la mim'is. One is talking about something that will be ruined if you throw it. Something that could get dirty, it could get spoiled, or could get squished if you throw it. Like, let's say you throw berries or something. They're going to get squished on the table, you throw them. But something that won't get ruined, you're allowed to throw it. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Mamshichin yayin betzinorot lifnei chatan v'lifnei kala. You're allowed to, they used to pour like wine in these tubes, like these glass tubes in front of the chatan v'kala as a type of, an honor to them. It looked fancy, it looked beautiful. It didn't go to waste. It would land in a cup and they would drink it afterwards. But you're allowed to use it. In other words, the point is you're allowed to use food for a decorative purpose, for an artistic purpose, let's say.
Kind of like those wine things that we have now, where you pour it.
They pour it in, it distributes it.
Yeah,
distributes all the spouts. Right. It's similar to that. And you can throw nuts and things in front of the chatan v'kala. It was a siman beracha. They would throw nuts. However, that's only in the summertime. But not in the winter. Why? Because in the summertime it's dry. So when the nuts will hit the ground, they won't get ruined. You can still pick them up. You can still eat them. But in the muddy roads of the wintertime, they're going to become too dirty. They're going to be ruined. And he says gluskaot. Oh, it says but when it comes to bread, you can't throw it anytime. Not in the summertime and not in the wintertime. Even though it's not muddy outside, because they'll get ruined even from having dust on them. Would you like this dusty loaf of bread? You're going to eat the bread that fell in the sand, that fell in the dirt? No. Nuts, maybe, because you pick up the nut, you wipe it off, and it has a type of surface that it doesn't stick to, things don't stick to it the same way. You could still eat it. But bread, if it falls on the ground, nobody's going to want to eat it. It's going to be ruined, and therefore it's going to be you're going to be ruining the food. So we'll do just a tiny bit more since we have a little extra time. Rav Yehuda says, if a person accidentally put food in his mouth, he forgot to say the beracha, he pushes it to one side of his mouth, and then he can say the beracha. Tanya chada bol'an. It says in one baraita, you swallow it if you forgot to say the beracha. V'tanya yidach politan, v'tanya yidach misalkan. One baraita said, if you put food in your mouth and you forgot to say the beracha, just swallow it and say the beracha on what you have left. One said, spit it out. One said, put it to the side of your mouth. Which one is correct? So look, actually, no problem. Ha detanya bol'an b'mashkin. When it said, swallow it, it meant when you have drink. In other words, you took a little bit of water or coffee in your mouth, and you realize, oops, I forgot to say shakol. If you can't spit it out and drink it again, that's not going to work. So what do? You just swallow what you took, and you say the bracha on the remaining coffee. Okay? When it said adetanya politan, when it said spit it out, that's where it's something not disgusting. You're chewing on something that if you spit it out and you say the bracha again, it won't be rendered disgusting from having been chewed on a little bit. Okay?
An example.
I don't know, maybe like a piece of bread. You just put it in your mouth for 1 second, then you realize you took it out. It could still be okay. It depends how much you chewed it, I guess. And when it says something that you should put it to the side of your mouth, that's something that if you were to spit it out, it's already squished from the minute you bite it, like fruit or something. The minute you bite berries or something, they become squished into a mass. You're not going to spit them out and now re-eat them again. So there are three solutions. If it's something you can spit out, it's not going to be disgusting, a solid, you do that. If it's something you can that is going to be disgusting, put it to the side of your mouth. If it's liquid, you can't really put that to the side of your mouth and say a beracha, so you just have to swallow it. And now we go to the Amud Aleph of Nun Aleph, which is where we're going to start tomorrow, but we'll just finish off this tiny part here. But even with something that isn't disgusting, though, if it's a solution to push it to the side of your mouth, then why do we ever tell the person to spit it out? Why not in all cases just tell him to put it to the side of his mouth and say the beracha? Why do we only allow him to do that when the item is going to be ruined? Answer, Tirgema Rav Yitzchak Kiskisa'a. Rav Yitzchak Kiskisa'a explained, Kamei de Rabbi Yossi Baravin, in front of Rabbi Yossi Baravin, Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Shene'emar, because it says in the pasuk, Yimaleh pi tilatecha. My mouth will be filled with your praise. What does that mean? It means your mouth has to be the only thing in your mouth has to be the praise of Hashem. And this is why we don't chew gum. Many people, I see them in synagogue, and I ask myself, as a person chewing gum in the middle of tefillah, you can't have gum in your mouth. You shouldn't have any food in your mouth, anything besides the praise of Hashem when you're praying. So that's why a couple of times I spoke about it in synagogue. I think it might have fallen on some receptive ears and perhaps some not as receptive. But this is a very important halakha. We don't chew gum during tefillah because you can't have anything else in your mouth but the praise of Hashem. And only in an extenuating circumstance where you put the food in your mouth and we don't want you to ruin the food. The food, if you spit it out, will be ruined. So then you can put it to the side of your mouth and say the bracha. But otherwise, we don't allow you to. But another very interesting thing you see here is how stringent they were about hefsed ochalin. How they didn't want food to be ruined. So even, they didn't say, like you might say, I'm so religious, I put the food in my mouth, I'll just spit it out and get another piece of food. Okay? In other words, I'll just spit out the liquid, I'll get more liquid. They said, no, if it's going to lead to losing that liquid, you're going to have to spit it out and it's going to be gone, or you're going to have to spit out the food, it's going to be ruined. Don't do it, just put it to the side of your mouth or just swallow it, because we don't want food. Every bit of food we have, it's a gift from Hashem, you're not going to ruin it. You don't want to throw it away. So that wasn't even an option. So you see, a person might think they're very religious by spitting it out because they didn't say a bracha, but really they would be throwing away a gift Hashem gave them. That's also the wrong thing to do. Chazak u'baruch. We have a minyan today.